This is astronaut Bruce McCandless. He is floating alone above the Earth, hundreds of feet away from his crew, with nothing to keep him alive but one incredible piece of technology: his spacesuit. For decades, NASA has been sending people out into the most inhospitable, unsurvivable environment we have ever encountered, the vacuum of space. That's only possible thanks to these multiple layers of protection that essentially build a human-shaped spacecraft around our astronaut's body. And after you see how this all works together, you'll never look at a spacewalk the same way again. Now, before we can build our spacesuit, we need to understand the dangers that our astronaut needs to be protected against, what exposure to outer space can do to a person. The terrifying thing about leaving the Earth is that we also leave behind all of the necessities of life, like air, for example. We need that to breathe, and at home, the majority of our air is made of two key ingredients: nitrogen and oxygen. But oxygen is the most important one. Without that, you suffocate. This should be fairly obvious, but something you might not think about as much is pressure. The air that surrounds us needs to be pressurized. At roughly sea level, meaning not on a mountain, the Earth has 14.7 psi of air pressure. If you go to the top of Mount Everest, that pressure drops to around 5 psi. And we know that people who climb up there almost always need to bring extra bottles of oxygen to breathe, otherwise they get sick and delirious and end up contributing to the large number of frozen bodies on the side of the mountain. The peak of Everest is about 9 kilometers above sea level. Our friend Bruce from before in his spacesuit was about 275 kilometers above the surface. Up here, the pressure drops down to 0, or about as close to 0 as you can get, and the effects of this on the human body go way beyond feeling lightheaded. So let's take a look at what would happen to a person outside of a spacesuit. In the vacuum of space, all liquids will instantly boil. Not because they get hot, it's because there's nothing holding the molecules together, so they vaporize and expand out into a gas. People are mostly made of liquid, so with zero pressure holding you together, the body would rapidly expand to about double its normal size. It's pretty gross, but that's made worse by the temperature problem. Most people think that in space you would freeze solid, but that is not always the case. On Earth, the warmth of the sun is filtered through several kilometers of atmosphere that spread out and regulate the heat. Think about the difference you feel between direct sunlight and when the sun passes behind a cloud. That's a great example of insulation, and it works in the opposite way at night. Even though the sun might be gone, the residual heat is being trapped in by the atmosphere and held on the surface of the Earth. If you take the atmosphere away and experience direct sunlight in space, like our unfortunate suitless astronaut, then the heat will rise to as much as 120 degrees Celsius on your exposed side. While over on the shadow side, where there is no sunlight, the temperature will drop below negative 100 degrees, so half cooked, half frozen, all bad. And then, just to add the finishing touch, light from the sun that hasn't been filtered through the Earth's atmosphere is highly radioactive. Not that it matters at this point after all of the other terrible stuff that has happened to you. As humanity enters a new space age, there is another frontier most people do not think about nearly enough: digital privacy. Every day, data brokers collect and sell huge amounts of personal information, things like your address, phone number, relatives, and even previous places you have lived can all end up online in searchable databases. That is one of the reasons I have been using Delete Me for the past 2 years. Delete Me is a hands-free subscription service that helps remove your personal information from hundreds of data broker and people search websites. Their privacy experts find where your information appears online, submit removal requests on your behalf, and continue monitoring those sites throughout the year so your data does not just quietly reappear later on. I've actually been using Delete Me for over 2 years now, and it gives me a ton of peace of mind knowing someone is actively working to pull my information out of these databases. In that time, Delete Me has reviewed over 40 data brokers and removed 6 listings that had my personal data. They've also been doing this for more than 15 years and were recently named Wirecutter's #1 data removal service. So if you want to reduce how much of your personal information is floating around online, go to joindeleteme.com/spacerace and use code SPACERACE for 20% off all Delete Me consumer plans. Thanks again to Delete Me for sponsoring today's video. So we know that space is horrifying. Now, how do we keep you safe from it? This is a question that NASA began figuring out the answer to back in the early 1960s. This was the first guy they launched into space, John Glenn, and this was his spacesuit. It was made to address our first two big concerns, providing him with air to breathe and keeping his body pressurized. Although, as long as the mission went to plan, John would never actually be out in space on his own, and the inside of his capsule had a full life support system, so he did not technically need the suit, but he wore it anyway, and so has every NASA astronaut who followed him. This is where we can start to divide spacesuits into two categories. There are flight suits, which are meant to be worn inside a spacecraft, and then there are extravehicular activity suits, which are those meant to be worn outside the spacecraft. Flight suits are essentially the last line of defense against a very bad day. The Soviet Union learned this the hard way in 1971 when a crew capsule experienced a failure in its life support system during a return from orbit. The spacecraft lost air pressure, and the three men inside, who were not wearing flight suits, passed away before reaching the surface. So if it wasn't already apparent, this is serious stuff. In some cases, a spacesuit can serve a dual purpose. For example, during NASA's Gemini missions of the mid-1960s, American astronauts began leaving their capsules for the first time. The old spacecraft were so small that they weren't able to change outfits, so the flight suit had to also work as an extravehicular suit. They accomplished this by using an umbilical cord to connect the capsule's life support system into the suit. And because the crew was now leaving the protective walls of their capsule, the suit had layers of insulation added to it that would help them regulate temperature. Now, once they got out there, the astronauts weren't able to do very much other than float around and complete a few simple tasks to demonstrate tool use in outer space, and that's because the astronaut was essentially just inside a human-shaped balloon. The suit was not designed for mobility. Not yet. Over the next decade, NASA would take everything they learned from the Gemini spacewalks and use that to design their Extravehicular Mobility Unit, or EMU. These were first worn on the moon by Apollo astronauts, and to meet the needs of their demanding lunar excursions, NASA upgraded the suit with its own portable life support system to replicate the environment inside the spacecraft on the outside. Then they added joints inside the arms for extra mobility, although the guys still looked pretty clumsy walking around up there. The experience gained across 5 moon landings allowed NASA to further refine the suit into a design that would be used exclusively for operating in the vacuum of space. This is the image that just about everyone would picture when they imagine a spacesuit, and that's largely because since it was first introduced in 1983, NASA has not made any change to the design of their EMU. It has been tried and tested on nearly 300 spacewalks by over 4 decades of astronauts on board the Space Shuttle and International Space Station. So, let's try one on. Our first layer of protection is known as the maximum absorbency garment. That's a fancy name for an adult diaper. There are no bathroom breaks on a spacewalk. Next, we put on a skin-tight full-body outfit called the liquid cooling ventilation garment. Sewn into the fabric is about 100 meters of plastic tubing that will circulate water all around your body. The insulation of the suit will trap heat inside, so the flowing water is what's going to keep you cool. Okay, this is where we get into the big stuff. The hard upper torso, or hut, comes down over your arms and head. It's a fiberglass shell that works like a hub for other parts to attach onto. Inside the hut, over the chest, is where we installed the disposable in-suit drink bag. It's a water bag with a drinking straw that leads up to your mouth. On the outside front of the hut, there are attachment points where we'll connect the mini workstation, which is kind of like a tool belt. And above that goes the display and control module, which has knobs and switches that allow you to fine-tune the environment and functions of the suit. Now, you won't be able to see your own chest from inside, so there's going to be a mirror attached to your wrist, and the labels on the control module are all written backwards so they can be read in the reflection. arm assemblies attach to the sides of the hut. There's an upper arm and a lower arm, and these two pieces come in different sizes to accommodate astronauts of various heights. And then on each piece, there's an adjustable strap to fine-tune the length for your specific arms. Mobility is taken care of by bearing joints at the shoulder and elbow. These allow for smooth rotation thanks to a ring of tiny metal balls that roll on a track inside the bearing. This is how you get full range of movement while maintaining an airtight seal. Moving with the rotation of the joints is very different from how your body normally operates, and astronauts have to go through special conditioning to train their arms to work with the suit and not lose energy fighting against it. Next, we attach the space pants, technically known as the lower torso assembly. It covers everything from the waist down to the integrated boots. This attaches to the hut using a large metal ring called the body seal closure. There are 2 more sets of smaller joints above the knees and ankles. These allow you to bend, but they don't rotate like the elbow joints. You're only able to twist your body a little bit from side to side thanks to a bearing where the legs attach to the waist. Okay, now let's add the outer layer shell of the spacesuit. This is what really separates your body from the deadly vacuum outside. The shell is built in several layers, each one serving a distinct purpose. Starting with the innermost material, this is a rubberized nylon layer called the pressure bladder. It essentially works like a balloon to hold your air pressure and stop your blood from boiling, although these EMU suits are not fully pressurized to Earth sea level conditions. That would make them too rigid and impossible to maneuver, so we actually keep the internal pressure right around the bare minimum of 4.3 psi. That's even less than our climber at the top of Mount Everest. That makes doing a spacewalk an incredibly physically demanding task, and it requires some extra work on the life support side to keep our astronauts breathing. On top of that is a woven polyester material called Dacron. We typically use it to make the linings of pillows and couch cushions because it's very resistant to abrasion. This is called the restraint layer, and it reinforces the pressure bladder. Looking at the arm assemblies again, you can see that the bladder and the restraint layer are rippled like a plastic drinking straw. That is to allow for movement inside the suit. The next group of layers are known as the thermal micrometeoroid garment. This begins with an internal liner. It's made of nylon ripstop fabric, which is basically the same material as a camping tent. That protects the outer layers from getting worn down by internal movement. Then there is the insulation, which is actually multiple layers of aluminized mylar, which looks a lot like tinfoil, and you'll see this on the outside of a lot of spacecrafts and satellites that make them look kind of janky, but it's actually a super efficient thermal insulation that can withstand extreme temperatures of both hot and cold. The outer shell of the spacesuit is made of something called orthofabric, which is painted white to reflect light from the sun. This layer has 3 main ingredients. One is Nomex, which is what firefighters' jackets are made of. The second is Kevlar, which is famous for being bulletproof, and then Teflon, which is the coating on non-stick frying pans. The orthofabric is your first line of defense against solar radiation, impact from micrometeoroids, space debris, or any other type of catastrophic situation that might arise. Okay, so we know what keeps the horrors of space on the outside. Let's talk about what keeps us alive on the inside. On your back is a device called the Primary Life Support System, or PLIS. This is how we bring the necessities of life on Earth to outer space. One interesting thing about these units is that they were originally made for space shuttle missions in the 1980s, and the exact same backpacks are still in use today. There were 18 of them manufactured to begin with, and 11 are still used on the ISS, although only 4 are in active service at any one time. Most of the pack is taken up by our oxygen supply. There are 2 large bottle-shaped primary tanks and 2 small, round secondary tanks. Inside the spacesuit, astronauts only breathe pure oxygen. Inside the space station, they have an Earth-like blend of oxygen and nitrogen, but they also maintain an Earth-like pressure of 14 psi. In the low-pressure environment of the EMU, at 4.3 psi, you need pure oxygen to stay conscious, just like our Everest mountain climber. The air supply is routed through a special filter made of lithium hydroxide. This is a chemical that naturally absorbs the CO2 exhaled by the astronaut and keeps the oxygen environment pure. There are also water tanks fitted into the backpack. These are piped into your liquid cooling ventilation garment, and the water is used for temperature control only, not for drinking. The Pliss runs on batteries. There's a main battery and a backup. These power a fan and pump motor that circulates our oxygen and water through the suit. At the very top of the backpack is a radio and antenna unit for communications with other astronauts and NASA ground teams. This all gets wrapped up in the same layers of orthofabric as the rest of the suit. But there's one more amazing feature on the EMU backpack. That is called SAFER, the Simplified Aid for EVA Rescue. Here is the scariest thing about working in space. If you get knocked loose and float away, there is nothing you can physically do to get yourself back to the station. That is where SAFER comes in. It's like a small compressed gas jetpack. There is just enough fuel in there to push yourself back to safety if a worst-case scenario were to occur, but it's definitely not something you want to use on a good day. Okay, now let's put our gloves on. These connect just above the wrist with another roller bearing that allows the glove to rotate around. The fingers have traction pads on the outside for a solid grip on tools, and on the inside there are actually little heaters in the fingertips so that your joints don't get stiff. Finally, we have the helmet. Just like everything else, this is made of layers. The first thing you actually do is put on this weird hat, often nicknamed the Snoopy cap. It's rigged up with microphones and speakers for your communication system. Now, the innermost part of the helmet itself is a shatter-resistant plastic bubble. On top of that goes the visor assembly. From that, a protective visor comes down and locks into place over the bubble. Then there is an optional gold-coated sun visor to use in extreme bright conditions, and also hard plastic eye shades that can slide down and block the sun entirely. On the very top goes a unit with cameras and lights so that you can see what you're doing, and so can the NASA ground control operators. The helmet does not attach with a bearing joint, so you can turn your head, but the helmet won't rotate with you. That means the entire torso needs to move in order to look left and right. And with all of that gear in place, we are now ready to spacewalk. For a fully trained astronaut, putting on the suit itself only takes about 15 minutes, but there does need to be a longer adaptation period where you begin to breathe pure oxygen, check for leaks, and then slowly depressurize down to avoid getting bends, which is what happens to deep-sea divers when they rise to the surface too fast. Being an astronaut is no easy job, but it's the price you pay for one of the most amazing experiences a human being can have. Although if you'd rather stay inside the space station, we've got a look at what life in there will be like as well. Click the box on screen now.